Hi, I'm Femi OK. Welcome to The Stream. This week on The Stream, across all of our platforms, we are going to be following some of the big stories, the big issues at the United Nations General Assembly. Today, we're talking about governments and climate action. Can we trust our governments to act? If you're on YouTube right now, you can be in our comment section. Your thoughts, your questions for our panel, put them right here, and you can be part of today's show. We kick off our conversation with Hilda, who's a climate activist in Uganda.
I come from one of the frontline communities most hit by the climate crisis, and we are unable to adapt to it. We are suffering a crisis we did not create. Every rain comes with a flood, rising water levels, submerging buildings, leaving many homeless if not dead, rising temperatures and more. World leaders know exactly what needs to be done, but are not willing to do because they prefer profit to the planet. The world needs an end to fossil fuels. We need a drastic cut in emissions, vaccine equity for a just and inclusive COP26, especially for us, the most marginalized, because we can draw on our experiences to offer solutions to a changing climate.
So we start our conversation with our panel, Selwyn, Nisreen, Co. So good to have you all here at The Stream. Selwyn, please introduce yourself to our stream viewers around the world.
Thank you so much, Femi. My name is Selwyn Hart. I'm the Special Advisor for Climate Action to the UN Secretary-General and Assistant Secretary-General for the Climate Action Team.
Good to have you.
Really great to join you.
Oh, it's great to have you. Nisreen, please say hello to our stream audience and tell them who you are and what you do.
Hi, everyone around the world. Good morning, good evening, and also good afternoon, wherever you are watching us. My name is Nisreen Al-Saim. I am from Sudan, and I'm the chair of the UN Secretary-General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change.
Good to have you. And hello, Co. We can't do this conversation without you. Tell our audience why, who you are, and what you do.
Well, thank you for having me, Femi. Hello, everyone. I'm Co Barrett. I'm one of the 3 IPCC vice chairs.
So, audience, Co, Nisreen, there was a big meeting today. It was a closed meeting. Leaders around the world were gathering. They were being very candid, and the UN was saying, we need to take climate change seriously. If you were there, Nisreen, what would you have told those world leaders to actually get them to take more action? What would you have said? What would have been your pep talk?
Well, I guess I would say that, unfortunately, we've spent more than a quarter of a century discussing something that already proved by science. And unfortunately, even most of the countries already ratified to the Paris Agreement, we still lag behind when it comes to action. And I would have told them that it's our future that will be actually in danger. Not only the future, but even now, even the present that we are living in. In Africa alone, more than 6 countries announced droughts, where other areas of the world announced very critical situation because of floods.
Right.
It doesn't really matter now if you are coming from a developed countries or a developing country, because climate crisis will hit us all.
Co, what would have been your advice to those world leaders? It would have been candid, unfiltered. What would you have said?
Well, is there a better answer than what Nisreen just said? And coming from the youth who are inheriting this earth that we are leaving for them, I think it's powerful. But I would say the earth is shouting, we need action.
Selwyn, you were actually there, right? So was it closed door because it was such an emergency and the world leaders had to be, I'm just wondering whether the UN Secretary-General gave them a dressing down?
Well, yes, it was a closed door meeting, and the Secretary-General convened this meeting really because the reality is we're way off track. And he wanted to instill a sense of urgency on the dire state of the climate process. And he also wanted to hear directly from leaders what they intend to bring to COP26 in Glasgow. We're way off target on emissions reductions, on finance, on support for adaptation. And the good news is that leaders agreed on the sense of urgency, the need for higher levels of ambition, and hopefully that will translate into increasing more ambitious commitments as we head towards Glasgow in the next 4 weeks. 5 weeks, sorry.
Yeah, you say hopefully. There's not much time between now and what is known as COP26, a big climate conference that's happening in Glasgow. People who are in the climate field just say Glasgow now. Don't even say COP26. Here's the Secretary-General just a few days ago. You feel the sense of urgency as he's speaking. Have a look, have a listen.
Unless there are immediate, rapid and large-scale reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, we will be unable to limit global heating to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And the consequences will be catastrophic. COP26 this November must mark that turning point. By then, we need all countries to commit to achieve net zero emissions by the middle of this century and to present clear, credible, long-term strategies to get there.
I am wondering, Ko, if this is incredibly frustrating for you. The science is there. We know, and we've known for a very long time, decades. As a scientist, what is this moment like for you?
You know, Femi, it's not frustrating for me. I feel like society in general and governments are listening to the science like they never have before. Sure, it's hard because the message is dire. I mean, you know, Earth is likely hotter now than it has been at any moment since the last ice age, 125,000 years ago. Every decade in the last 40 years has been warmer than the one before. So the evidence is mounting. But I'm not frustrated. I'm optimistic. I think people are taking the science seriously, and it should spur action.
I'm going to play Yuri for you, Selwyn. He's a climate scientist. I'm going to play him to you and then ask you, then how do you turn what he says, that science, into policy and action? Here's Yuri.
We already live on a changed planet that has warmed by more than 1 degree Celsius and where we are now experiencing the devastating impacts of floods, heat waves, or wildfires. Science can now attribute these changes to our human activities and our greenhouse gases. That means we also know what we need to do to avoid this from getting worse. Greenhouse gases need to be reduced as deeply as possible, and carbon dioxide needs to be reduced to zero.
Selwyn, can you explain to us why it is so difficult to get governments to actually have a climate change policy? We don't even have any red flags anymore. It's just the climate is changing in every single continent around the world. Why is this difficult, Selwyn?
Well, it's a very complex issue. The science is extremely clear. As Yuri said, as Ko said, and as Nisreen said, governments know what they need to do. We need to cut emissions by about 45% below 2010 levels by 2030 and achieve net zero emissions by 2050. But we're not seeing the national commitments. We're not seeing national commitments from governments with the level of ambition that is required or in line with the science.
Yeah.
And the reality is that countries see this as difficult. Hard choices need to be made. It means transformation of energy systems. It means transformation of transport systems, which is very expensive, especially in.
Is this just about money, Selwyn? Is this just about money? And Nisreen is dying to interject. Let me Nisreen interject, then Selwyn, you pick up off the back of Nisreen. Go ahead. Are we just talking? Are we just too cheap to save our planet, Nisreen?
I think Selwyn is so diplomatic. That's why he thinks that the issue is but I think anyone who have a mind inside of their heads knows that it's a money, it's an interest issue. It's not easy to actually stop a whole industry like the fossil fuel industry. They control a lot of sectors. They actually even support a lot of sectors. They support sometimes the health sector. They even support some of the election campaigns for most of the world leaders nowadays. So money, influence, and interest. This is the triangle that actually stops the process from happening. Simply. How to solve this issue is complicated, but why? The reason is very obvious. It's influence, interest, and wealth.
Selwyn?
Yeah, leadership by governments is absolutely critical. And we need governments to take the lead in setting very clear climate commitments, targets, and policies. But governments can't do this alone, as Nisreen said. We need the voices of young people who must advocate for their future, these are young people whose future will be jeopardized, who will not be able to realize their full potential if we don't address the climate crisis. But we need to also hold our leaders to account. Leaders signed on to the Paris Agreement, leaders committed to pursue the 1.5 degree goal of the Paris Agreement. The current commitments place us at 2.7 degrees Celsius. This is unacceptable. They're not living up to their commitments.
So can I show just really obviously what the pledges were and what we're actually seeing right now. Have a look on my laptop here. This is just such a great graphic. It's a terrible graphic, but really easy to see. So this is a climate action tracker. This is the 1.5 Celsius Paris Agreement. Who is compatible? Gambia. One place. And then almost there, almost agreeing to cutting the emissions and what they promised and what they've delivered. Costa Rica, Ethiopia, Kenya, Morocco, Nepal, Nigeria, the UK. Insufficient. You can see all of these areas around here. Look at this. The EU, the European Union. That's not even one country. There's many there. USA here. Highly insufficient. Huge list here. And then critically insufficient. Russia, Saudi Arabia, Thailand. So there were promises, and those promises have not been delivered. Let's talk about the impact that's actually happening down on the ground. Nisreen, you go first, and then I'm going to bring in Vlad, who's also a young climate activist. Nisreen, thoughts?
Can you bring the diagram again? I just want to show you something.
Yeah,
actually.
Yeah, go ahead. It's here. It's ready.
Yes, the countries who had a sufficient NDCs and the almost sufficient, all of them, but UK are developing country. They are from the lower emission.
Isn't that amazing? The countries that are probably emitting the least are doing the most work. And Nisreen just did that because she's almost diplomatic herself. She said NDC, nationally determined contributions. That is the promise. That was the promise that was made during the Paris Agreement, and then whether they actually delivered. I want to bring in Vlad here, Nisreen, if I may. I'm going to play Vlad to you, Co, because Vlad is talking about climate change that is happening right now where he lives. Have a listen, have a look.
My home community, the capital city of Moldova, Chisinau, is directly dependent in its fate on climate change through the fate of the river Dniester, where we get 80% of our potable water from. Unfortunately, the situation of the Dniester is degrading with every single year, and there is no end in sight so far. And its fate is dependent, of course, on how the Paris Agreement is progressing in its fulfillment. Unfortunately, the recent data shows that we are at best 50% way there, but we are still on the way to allow a warming that could be more than 2.5 degrees. There is still a lot more action required, a lot more commitment, and a lot more finance to fulfill this commitment as well.
So, Co, the recent assessment from the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change was that we are at a code red for humanity. There is no obscure language there. What does that mean in terms of the science, Co? What are we seeing right now that is deeply, deeply scary?
Well, first I'll say that stories like the one shared by Vlad are stories that we are seeing all across the globe. I mean, look at this summer. Heat waves, droughts, fires, floods. That, like what we're seeing here across the globe recently, is exactly what we envision to be typical of global warming, and they are also directly caused by global warming. So the report goes into detail about how the Earth has warmed and how it's projected to warm in the future. It talks about how we are now able to attribute human influence to the climate extremes that we're seeing. The science finds that the next 10 to 20 years are critical, really, to getting the problem under control. We cannot continue to put off rapid and transformational action. The good news is, though, if we strengthen our resolve and act now, it's not too late to forestall many of the most dire consequences. Reducing every ton of carbon pollution and avoiding every fraction of a degree of warming will not only lessen the harm over the next few decades, but will reverberate for centuries to come.
I am going to ask all of you guests to do a speed round. We have Shivansh on YouTube right now. He has a question, and I want an instant answer from all three of you, if I may. Developed countries harm the environment most. How do we convince the carbon emission giants to change? Instant, fast answer. Nisreen, you start.
Well, renewable energy. Renewables is there is a big dilemma regarding renewable energy right now, because renewable energy itself is a way to get clean energy. Unfortunately, the manufacturing of renewable energy materials or renewable energy equipments is yet not very green. So I think we should do green renewable energy. This will reduce a lot of the emission. It will also reduce the inequalities, because access to electricity and power is a great tool to development.
Selwyn, this is your entire job. How do you persuade the carbon emission giants to change, is what Shivansh asked. He's watching right now. What answer are you going to give him?
Well, my answer, it's in the economic interest of countries to be more ambitious on climate action. Renewable energy in most parts of the world is much cheaper than coal power and in many instances fossil fuel power generation. And energy emissions account for 3/4 of total emissions. So it's in the economic interest. It makes good business sense for a country, for a company, for a city to be ambitious on climate change and to go green.
Make it worth their while. Co, what would you say?
I would actually agree with what Nisreen said and add to it a little bit. You know, this is an incredible opportunity for us to transform our economies. And we've already seen it with renewable energy. Solar and wind prices are going down, and it's so much more affordable. We just need to take that kind of action and apply it to transport, cities, agriculture, and kind of bring ourselves into the future here. It's time.
I will even go more radical, if I may, and I say that we should some sort of find a degrowth plan for the already developed countries, while have the equity of actual development in the underdevelopment or least development countries. Degrowth is a scary story for a lot of people, but when you make it sense, it makes a lot of sense. Because if I ask someone, do you prefer to live long, happy and healthy life, or do you prefer to die fast and to die rich? I think most of us will choose to live long, healthy life and simple, instead of having a wealthy life with a lot of medical, health implications, economical implications, infrastructure implications, and so on. So I guess degrowth is a scary idea for a lot of people, but we might find it the only way, the only solution to actually reduce the pressure that we are already putting in the planet.
So a couple of weeks ago, guests, the stream looked at the climate emergency and some of the climate activism that was happening, particularly a group called Extinction Rebellion, where they are taking our climate crisis so seriously that they're using a very specific kind of protest. So on that show, we had Rupert Reed, and Rupert had a prediction about COP26. Remember, that's that big climate change conference that's happening in Scotland in November. Have a listen, have a look to what he said and he told us on the stream a few weeks ago.
Unbelievable, appalling inaction on this for such a long time. We're now moving to a moment when that could change, which is the COP at Glasgow, the big climate conference in November. But I'm going to say something unpopular potentially now and controversial, which is that conference is virtually bound to fail. It will fail us, as they failed us previously. Even the Paris Agreement in 2015, which was an amazing diplomatic achievement, is a paper tiger. And we're on course, if we stick to the Paris Agreement, we're on course even then for civilizational meltdown. So the bottom line is this: there are no adults in the room. There is no cavalry riding to the rescue. And really a crucial message that I would like to give to everyone watching tonight who is thinking, what can I do? What should we do in this desperate situation? Is we need to act on this together, and we need to act on this without expectation that our governments are going to save us and ride to the rescue.
Wow, okay. It shocked me when that happened on the stream. Selwyn, I've seen enthusiasm for COP26. I've seen a lot of cynicism for COP26, and it's almost like the last chance saloon. Are we putting a lot of pressure on our governments to be able to come up with something that is actually going to change where we are right now? Selwyn, thoughts, COP26?
Yes, the Secretary General said it this morning that if we don't change course, there is a high risk of failure at COP26. And he has been very clear in terms of what needs to happen. Countries need to put more ambitious national commitments on the table. They need to increase the climate finance that they're providing to developing countries. And they also need to support vulnerable developing countries who are on the front lines of the climate crisis with finance in order to better adapt and build resilience to climate change. But the reality is we have 5 weeks left. We need to use every day between now and COP26 to get countries to be more ambitious. And I'm not ready to give up yet. The Secretary General is not ready to give up yet. The beauty of the Paris Agreement is that, it's not a perfect agreement, but it's our best hope of stemming the climate emergency. And it allows countries to submit periodically their national commitments. And we've seen countries increase. Countries representing half of global emissions have submitted NDCs, and these NDCs these national commitments, not acronyms. Right. And these national commitments have led to a reduction in emissions of around 12%. It's not enough, right? It's not enough. But every single ton of carbon, every single degree, every single ton of carbon that is reduced or avoided helps us to get closer to 1.5. We're not there yet. There are 20 countries that represent 80% of global emissions. We need these countries to lead.
All right. So what needs to happen next? That's something that we asked Teresa Anderson, and this is what she told us.
Let's be frank, the world isn't on track to meet the Paris Agreement targets, either to limit warming to 1.5 degrees or to provide enough climate finance to developing countries. So if we're to have a successful COP26, we need to see movement in 3 key areas. Firstly, we need to see governments, particularly the wealthiest polluting governments who've done the most to cause the climate crisis, taking far more action to be transformative, to be radical, in fact, to stop polluting and to reduce their own greenhouse gas emissions at national level. Secondly, we need to see those same governments providing far more climate finance to lower income countries. And thirdly, we need those governments that are developing the international policy frameworks at COP26 climate negotiations to really close loopholes for greenwashing and to protect the rights of those on the front line of the climate crisis.
So thank you to our guests. Thank you, Teresa. Selwyn, Nisreen, and Co for being our guest today and for sharing your knowledge and your insights on can governments take action. I feel that they are optimistic, perhaps more optimistic than our audience watching. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.